Hi, everybody. Now the clock just turned 1 p.m. set, and I think that both me and Lasse are ready for the webinar. I want to welcome you all to this Organic Agility webinar today. It's nice to see that we have quite many attendees already here, and some are still dropping in, so that's very cool. My name is Sofia Svanbeck, and I'm working at Agile 42 Finland and Sweden, and I will today be your host. My colleague Lasse, who you can also now see in the cam, he is going to present to you today the topic on why your company will fail in 2020, and this is going to be very interesting to listen to. A few practicalities before we start. You can use the chat for any kind of comments throughout the webinar, so please just make sure that you are writing to all panelists and attendees so that the discussion there is transparent to everybody. For any questions, please use the Q&A so we can have a look at the questions after the webinar. The webinar will take about 45 minutes, and then we will have some time left for the questions afterwards. I also want to remind you that the webinar is recorded, so everybody will have the link afterwards who is attending today. I think that's it for me for now. I will let Lasse present himself. So enjoy the webinar.
So hello everyone, I hope you can hear me well. So I'm Lasse, I'm from our Agile 42 Finland office, and I'm here to tell you why your company will fail in 2020. Funny thing here is, we actually came up with this title before the current virus situation. So we're thinking, should we change the title? But in the end, we kind of decided, okay, let's go with the title that we had originally and stick with it. We're actually talking about a lot of more common things and other things than just the current Corona situation. I'm going to turn off my video because I want to conserve my bandwidth for the actual content. The internet is not always the best at the moment due to everyone working remotely and everyone doing video connections and so on. So I'll turn off the camera just to make sure that we at least get the slides through and the audio through and not lose something because I'm using all the bandwidth for a video there as well. So why is your company going to fail? Fia already mentioned the kind of practicalities in there. I'd like to add that I will also ask you some questions at some point and to write in the chat in the chat. But please, when you write in the chat, remember to put the two as all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see the comments or answers to the questions that I will ask you to write in there. I'd like to also remind everyone that this is actually the first webinar of a series of webinars. So we start kind of with the background today in why companies face some new challenges in the coming decade, in the 2020s. But we will have another webinar coming up on the 23rd of April that is going to go into the building blocks of a resilient organization. That's more into going into the answers to this webinar. So this webinar, we're more focusing on the challenges and problems. And in the next one, we'll go more deeper into how to address these challenges and problems. And then in May, we will talk more on leadership. And then summer to, let's say, autumn, the intention is to go even deeper in the different parts in how to address organizations in these challenging times. But what I want to go through today is I want to first talk a little bit about the increasing uncertainty and volatility that companies are facing and these effects on how they affect the market in which we are operating. Go through a couple of different reactions to that uncertainty and volatility that we have. Talk about how we need to change in how we make decisions and what things affect that. And then shifting the metaphor of the company itself. But first, there's a nice quote that I've always liked. Prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future, from Niels Bohr. I find this a very good quote, and I've seen this years ago the first time, and I really find this is something that everyone should keep always in mind, especially when working in these kind of uncertain times. It is difficult to predict what is going to come in the future. However, there are some things that I can say with, let's say, high level of certainty that will happen. And one of those things is that the uncertainty and volatility that we are facing in our environment is going to increase the further we go in the future. It is unlikely that this kind of uncertainty will become less. We have seen in the last 20, 30 years how different things like digitalization, the growth of the internet, globalization, have all changed the environment in which we operate. And all of these have contributed to an increasing uncertainty and volatility. And this is probably going to continue in this way even further. Things are going to change faster and faster the further we go in the future. It's unlikely that these changes will come slower and slower. Therefore, I think it is important that companies and everyone tries to prepare themselves for these ever-coming faster changes. Because if you are not prepared when these changes happen and your competitor is prepared, you are going to be at a disadvantage in a very competitive global market in which we are all operating. Now, to get some examples of what kind of uncertainties and volatilities could come up in the future, I'd like you, the attendees, to participate and write in the chat, like, what do you think is the biggest uncertainty that, for example, your company is facing in the next 10 years? What do you think is going to be the biggest thing that you need to address and take into account? So please open the chat, and in the chat, type in to all panelists and attendees, what do you think is your biggest challenge? I'll give you a little bit of time to write some examples. No one has any challenges at all? How AI will replace workers, inability to change in a VUCA world, being a large company and getting stuck in processes, yes. More and more distributed and remote organizations. Does the company have all the necessary infrastructure? Uncertainty of market, yes. Freelance employment, yes. Changing AI roles, integrating user feedback with development process. Yeah, all those are good challenges. You can get hit by multiple of these. And it's the challenge you are having here is these are all predictable challenges. These are your known unknowns, the challenges that you are aware of. But you also must not forget that there's another level of challenges, what we call the unknown unknowns, the challenges that you are not aware of right now. For example, did anyone predict that this year would start with the current virus situation? Did anyone prepare last summer for this? Probably not. So we are always going to get hit by some unknown unknowns, challenges that we just didn't predict in our future. And those are going to face some of the biggest challenges that we have because you haven't prepared for those challenges. Now, as I said, I wanted to talk a bit about how these affect the market itself and how these affect the evolution and changes of the market that we are in. Perhaps some of you have seen something like this before. This is a market curve. So we can divide the market into different phases that it goes through. We have an innovators phase. This is characterized by the people who are coming up with a new product. They're innovating it. They're creating something completely from scratch, something completely new. We have entered then an early adopter phase. This is where the initial startups company offering is being used by the first customers. This is often characterized by the users actively participating in the development of that product itself. These are often called the visionaries. They are buying a product because it is new and they want to have something new and innovative and something different from everyone else. And after that, we go to the early majority market. This is where most of the sales happens. This is where you make most of your money. This is where also, this is the size of roughly usually a third of the whole market itself. And after the early majority, we go to the late majority and then to the laggards in the end. Now, there are some big differences between some of these. For example, the early majority wants a very different product from what the early adopters want. On the early adopter side, they want to actively participate in something. And when we get to the early majority, what they want is more of a packaged product. They want to have something that is ready, something that is just off the shelf that they can just use. They don't want to participate in the development of the product. They want something that is completely finished there. Now, why is this relevant for us? Is that when the market changes from one phase to another, it increases or it forces also the company to change with that market. The company needs to have a different culture, a different way of operating at different phases in that market. Now, the challenge we are facing is that traditionally, these market cycles have taken somewhere between 50 to 30 years to go through from the innovators all the way to the laggard phase. Now, this has changed quite a bit in the last decades. Now we're more talking about something like under 10 years. Imagine back then, how long did you have a normal traditional telephone? The normal telephone market existed for a very, very long time. Then came the mobile market. But even the mobile phone market has gone already through multiple iterations of this. First, we had the basic mobile phones, then came the smartphones, and so on. And every phase has become faster than the previous one. Just as some example of how we are going through these kind of changes more quickly as we go along. But there's also many other examples in there. Now, at this point, I'd like to make a poll. I'd like to see how, oops, wrong window. Now I have a technical issue. Fixed. I'd like you to think about your product. Where would you say your product is? Are you working in a company that has a product that is in the innovator phase, early adopter, or perhaps early majority, late majority, or in the laggards? Let's see what kind of audience we're having. So I started a poll. Could you please answer what you have? And then let's see what we have there. So I think most of the people have answered in there. We have 72% already voted. Let's see if I can share the results of the poll. This is so sharing the results. There it is. So actually 39% say they are in the late majority market. And then early adopters is the second largest that we have in our audience today. So what I want to go into here next is how does an organization have different, there's kind of like different phases or different subparts to this market curve. So sorry, every time I press on the zoom, it pops up that window in the middle of my share screen. So what I wanted to show is, first of all, there's one big change that happens in to the company when it goes through different phases of that market. So when you go from an early adopter to an early majority market, you're also shifting the model in how the company operates. In the innovator and early adopter phase, you're in what we call a sale to make market. So you're selling first the product and then you tend to make it. You make something more like a project and you're more focused on things like vision, potential, getting fast feedback from your customers. And you kind of like using your customers to develop that product in a collaborative way together with your customer. But once you go to the early majority market, you need to shift to what is called a make to sell model, which means you have a pretty packaged pre-existing product that you're just selling to the existing customers. It's kind of like a shrink wrapped product that goes to them. And there you're focusing more on the quality, the performance, and the speed of delivery of that particular product. Now, these mean also for any company that there is a change in the way that that company operates. If you look at the left side, sell to make, you're more focused on getting feedback and collaborating, working together with your customer. While on the right side, make to sell, you're more focused on things like performance and speed and so on, and you're less worried about quality, about collaboration with those customers together. So that, of course, means also a big change in how you work together with them. Hence, this is also called crossing the chasm, because a lot of companies fail in this change from the sell to make to sell market change in there. Now, this is not the only challenge that we face with the market curve. There's another one, and that is related to this, that all the way up to early majority, a company is typically concerned about effectiveness. Effectiveness means, what is the desired result, that we are successful in what we do, that we build the right product for the right customer. While on the late majority and laggard side, you're more interested in efficiency of your development, of your managing that product. The reason for that is that in the late majority and laggard market, what you have is an ever shrinking profit margin. All the way up to the early majority, usually there is quite a bit of money to be made. But once you hit the late majority, the amount of money to be made starts to go down. There's a lot of other competitors on the market that are all offering the same product. And there's an ever decreasing market that is becoming smaller and smaller, which means you have an imbalance of how much product there's available and how many there are interested parties in actually buying that product, which means you have to be as efficient as possible. That gives us actually a second point where a company has to change its model. So in a product's kind of like life cycle, or a company's life cycle, you have two big points where you make cultural changes. One is when you go from early adopters to early majority, and another one is when you go from early majority to late majority. Now, when dealing with uncertainty, there are typically two different general approaches in how we can deal with uncertainty in an organization, in our environment. We can choose to either go what we call a robust approach, or we can go with a resilient approach. Now, what are the differences between these two? Well, when we go robust, what we're trying to do is create an organization, a company that is capable of performing without failure under a wide range of conditions. This is the definition of what robustness means. So in practice, that means that when a company, an organization is going to get hit by something unexpected, it just keeps operating as it always has, and it doesn't really get affected by that unexpected things. It just keeps doing what it's always been doing, and it doesn't change their outcome or how successful they are. What we mean with resilience is that it's an ability to recover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. So in resilience, we are talking about an organization that when it gets hit by something unexpected, it can change the way it operates to use that new way, that new opportunity. So on the robust side, it stays unchanged and just operates like it always has. While on the resilient side, we kind of assume that the organization is changing, but it's adapting to that new uncertainty, that new market that we're facing. Now, at this point, I would like you to think about which of these two approaches would you prefer for your organization, assuming that you are in this kind of changing market. There are a lot of uncertainties coming up. Is it better strategy for you to go with being as robust as you can, become like hard like a diamond? Or do you think it is better better strategy to become resilient, able to adapt, to change yourself, so that you can become different or exploit these kind of new opportunities? I have a poll for that as well, and I'd like you to fill that in. There we go. I'll give you a few seconds. The results are interesting. So we are at 73% having voted, which is almost everyone. So let's end the poll and let's put up the results. Well, it actually turns out that 100% of you would think it is a better strategy to become resilient over robust. And I agree with this. I think in the long term, it is a better strategy to be as resilient as possible to adapt to any changes versus being as hard and unchangeable as possible. It's a better strategy to do things. Now, if you are not resilient right now, your organization is not as resilient as it could be, doesn't that mean that it actually implies some changes to your organization, and especially changes to how you make decisions? It implies changes to the structure of the organization, your culture, and the way how you lead an organization. This is especially important if you are trying to build that resilient organization from an organization that is not yet resilient right now. Now, to understand that, what we found is a good way to explain the kind of challenge around that is that when you're building a resilient organization, you have an organization that is trying to accomplish some vision. It has some goals, metrics, and so on, and it's wanting some results that lead toward those goals. And how do you get to those results is by doing actions. The organization is doing things in order to get to those results. However, what is the things that affect the actions that the people in an organization do? What's kind of like guiding them in those actions in there? Well, there's two things below that action level, and those are the beliefs and experiences of the people in that organization. A good example here is, for example, you're asking an organization, you want it to be resilient, you want it, for example, to be more self-organizing, but you have an organization that has never ever self-organized before. You had to have an organization where the management has always told people what they need to do, and like, here's your tasks for the week, please go and do, and then at the end of the week, report back to me how you did those. Now, on Monday morning, you're saying, okay, we are not going to do that anymore. Instead, I'd like you to self-organize yourself as a self-organizing team. What do you think will happen at that point? The beliefs and experiences of the people in that organization are all around that, well, how we operate as an organization, how we have always been successful is by people telling us what we need to do, and we just do what we are told. And that is how we have operated for the last 20 years. Now, in that kind of setting, if you just ask them to become self-organizing, that is going to lead to a incoherent organizational culture. Now, your actions you're asking the people to do are not coherent with the beliefs and experiences that those people have. And you can imagine what probably will happen. The people will probably not self-organize, and instead they will look for anyone telling them what to do. And when they hear something like that, they will jump on that and do that. Or the other choice is that they actually are so lost that they will do absolutely nothing and just sit there waiting for someone to come along and tell them what to do. Now that faces a big challenge when we're talking about creating this kind of resilient organization that is not yet resilient. because the results and the actions is what we can manage. That's where we can create tools, processes, roles, and responsibilities. But the things that are under that blue line is what we call the organizational culture. And the culture we cannot manage. We cannot create a process or roles for a new culture. A culture is the collective experiences and beliefs that the people have in that organization. And changing that is difficult and takes quite some time. But if you don't change those experiences and beliefs, you will not achieve what we call a coherent organizational culture that is aligned between the actions and the beliefs and the experiences, which will lead to constant frictions. Now, if the culture is aligned, coherent with the actions that you want, then the organization will behave in that way you want. Let's say you have beliefs and experiences that are about self-organization, that organization will naturally self-organize itself. So you don't even need to manage or ask them to do it because they will naturally do that. So building a resilient organization is about building the right experiences, beliefs that lead you to that kind of resilience organization. And that's where management or the people leading that organization have to shift their own mindset as well, from just managing that organization to leading that organization. So what we need to create is the behaviors, the habits, the rituals, and the stories that build those experiences and beliefs that will make up our culture in an organization. Now, there is a third point that I want to make, and that is that organizations that want to become more resilient and be able to deal with this uncertainty and volatility is they have to be shifting their metaphor of how they see themselves. So that means they have to shift how they see themselves as an organization. Most organizations see themselves as something looking roughly like this. You have some requests going in, and at the end, you have some product coming out. And in between, you have processes, you have roles, and you have different structures of that organization that churn out that product from the customer inputs that you have in there. Now, that is what we call a very mechanical metaphor for an organization. The good thing about this is it's very efficient. It's good to optimize. You can apply a lot of principles and value and things from lean, for example, in there. And you can create a very good organization that is very efficient at producing the same product over and over, for example. But how does that kind of organization react to, let's say, this uncertainty and volatile changes in the market? Well, since it's relying a lot on those processes and roles, those processes and roles would have to change every time there is a change in the market. And if you've gone through an organizational change, you know that usually in a non-trivial sized organization, it takes between 6 to 12 months to reorganize that organization to the new processes, new roles, positions, and so on. Well, if the market keeps changing much faster than what you're capable of reorganizing that organization, then you're starting to get into some trouble with a mechanical organization. It's not going to be very resilient and adaptable to that changing, fast changing market that we have. So what we are kind of advocating to organizations is to move away from a mechanical view of your organization to something that is more organic, something that evolves as the company, the organization faces some different challenges. What we mean with an organic is that it is a network of people that interact with one another, and they together can adapt to the circumstances by co-evolving with that environment. That reason there is that human beings are flexible. They are able to, collaborate, work together. They're capable of learning, and together they can find different new innovative ways of how to cope with an unexpected situation, which is very difficult on a mechanical metaphor of an organization, where the people are often asked to not deviate from our processes and roles and descriptions that we have, and where we want to follow those as much as possible. While on the organic side, we don't necessarily have all the same ways of working, and we try to find what is in this situation the best way to adapt in there. So it's about shifting the metaphor from a machine to an organism, which also means that the overall strategy of an organization will change from preventing failure from happening. That's kind of like the robustness approach. We try to not fail, to recovering from failure as fast as possible, and not just recover, but also adapt to any kind of failure to change the organization to become better in the long run. This is the more resilient approach that we want to follow in there. To do this, what we have to help you with this is what we call the organic agility framework. That consists out of leadership models, leadership behaviors, in ways in how to assess that organization, how it works. We have different principles that act as a scaffolding, as a kind of like a framework for how to build such a resilient organization. And these principles lead us to different practices that we can create in an organization in order for us to be resilient. And all of this is then supported by different tools and models that help us to do this, and that especially feedback into the leadership part, which then guides those principles towards the practices. This is what we want to go through in the future webinars. So in the next one that is coming up in April, my colleague Giuseppe will go through the leadership part of this framework. And then in future webinars, we will go through the principles of how to create a very resilient organization. Now, I already mentioned this, that you have the upcoming webinars in there. So on the 23rd, 4th is the building blocks for a resilient organization. That's the overview. And sorry, in May is the leadership part. Besides those, we also have upcoming webinars on more of the practical side of how to coach. I've put some up on the slide on how to structure coaching, on portfolio management. We have also some case studies coming up on cultural incoherence, common management mistakes, and so on. So we have a lot of interesting, cool webinars coming up in the near future. Also, if you want to know more about the overall organic agility approach, this was just the first kind of like short introduction in the background problems that we're facing. You will find more information on our website about this, or you can order from Amazon the book. We have a case study up there as well from a customer in Germany, and all the previous webinars that we have are also available on YouTube. At this point, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to open the floor for some questions. If you have some questions, please write them into the Q&A section, and we will go through what questions you have. And I can try to answer some of your questions.
While everybody is typing their questions, I will take time to thank you, Lasse, for the presentation today. And all these links that Lasse just showed you also on the slide will be in the follow-up email with the recording of the webinar. So you don't need to panic now and type everything down. We will send them to you. So let's see if you have some questions in the Q&A for Lasse to answer. So there are some questions. I can start with the first one. What are your tips for coaches and managers that are aiming to transition to the organic way of working?
Well, my first tip would be is to start with the leadership, to understand what is it that you want to accomplish, and then focus on building a coherent understanding in the leadership what that means, and then going from there. Don't start with the tools or some frameworks that give you a structure or process or something like that. You most likely will have to build your own way of working. Don't try to copy what the other companies are doing one for one, because most likely what they're telling is an idealized, simplified version of what they're actually doing, and trying to implement that idealized, simplified version in your organization will most likely not lead to a successful outcome in the end.
This maybe also answered a little bit the next question, which is, it looked like the organic agility model started with leadership, or did I misread that?
Yes, it starts with the leadership. That's why we have it here at the left, and the leadership feeds in to the principles, which feeds into the practices. And the practices have to be evolved by a company itself. So there is no standard set of practices which you can take and say, oh, here, just implement these practices and you will be fine. Because in every company, those practices will be different. Because just by nature, the company does different things from another company and so on. And the tools are just at the bottom because they're just there to support that leadership and those principles that we have.
Thank you. Then there is another question. What reactions do you get when presenting the organic agility? What do companies tend to say as reasons for not going that direction, if any?
Generally speaking, the reaction is positive and good. For some organizations, yes, as reasons for not going in that direction, often is that, oh, we are already implementing framework X, and you replace the X with any favorite framework you want to do about, and it's, well, we don't want to deal with another framework at this point.
Okay. Then here is an example that leads to a question. So I will read it out loud for you. 30 to 40 years old company that the management of which believed itself to be robust and now thinking of becoming resilient. What are the advices you have for those people who have old robust mindsets? In short, the question is how to change the mindset from robust to resilient of stubborn people.
I'd go back to the pyramid picture over there. I think what that management needs to get is the experiences of what resilience actually is, because probably deep down they believe that the robustness was the right choice to do. And I try to build some experiences for that management. What does this actually mean? And what does it mean for us to be resilient? How does this look like? And then the other focus is on the leadership behaviors. That's something for one of the future webinars, is their leadership behavior has to change. Most likely that company has a very directing leadership behavior, and that needs to change to another style or way of leadership, and that will require one-on-one coaching with that leadership so that they change their own behavior.
Okay. Then there is a question, how do you introduce this to leadership when most practices are rooting from the teams?
By talking to that leadership. Starting with what is the kind of like the goal, the problem that the organization is trying to address, what is the strategic goal of that organization, and start the conversation from there. Don't start the conversation from the tools and the team level practices, which are frankly for the top leadership probably not that interesting and they don't know that much about it. And then see kind of like what those challenges are, what's the market challenges that we have, and what kind of culture and organization do we want to have to survive those challenges, and then go from there.
Thank you. I must say we have really good questions here today in the Q&A. The next one is how to approach top management with suggestions to change.
I'm not sure it's always a good idea to tell them how they should change themselves. I'd like to ideally for the top management to come up with their own ideas on how to change. So for me, it's more like a question, how do I get them to find the things that they want to change? How to get them to see that they need to change and come up with those changes themselves. That goes through asking the right questions. You can run workshops around that. For example, this is just a short introduction to organic agility. We run this often with leadership in a 1 or 2 day setting, where in that workshop we try to get them to see what kind of challenges they have and what kind of need for change they have and what that would mean for them. We don't tell them what that change exactly is, but we want them to come up with that change themselves.
Okay. Then there's a question of, have you ever had leadership not want to use any of the 5 principles?
I mean, so some leaders, some of the principles are more important than others. But in the end, all of the 5 principles, which we haven't gone through yet, are important for pretty much any organization. They're generic in that sense. But of course, the focus in this time right now might be on certain principles more than on others. There's also a reason why our 5 principles are in a certain order. You usually need to focus on the first couple of principles more before you go to the 4th and 5th principle. You can't go backwards through those principles because the organization is just not capable of really addressing those principles unless it has addressed the first principles out of those 5. So I wouldn't be too worried about it if the leadership isn't currently addressing every single one of those 5 principles, as long as they're kind of like going through them in a, from the beginning and then moving on to the next one and so on.
Okay. At the moment, there is one question left, so let's take it as well. Is it possible that parts of organizations are resilient and parts that are robust because of the products or services they produce or support?
That's a good question. Yes, it is. It also depends what kind of product and what kind of organization you're in. I mean, if you have some sort of legacy product that is maintained by one part of the organization, it might be the right choice that in that part of the organization, they have a different culture, a different way of operating from the other part of the organization that is creating a new product. And that might mean that some parts are more focused on being as efficient as possible and not changing anything, because any change is going to cost money and there's very little money to be made in this product. So we want to avoid that kind of situation. So yeah, there is good reasons why different parts of the organization want to have different setups, let's say.
I think the person asking this question was referring to telco. So
yeah, applies to any kind of company, that even telco companies. One part of the organization might be more robust and the other one focus more on resilience. But the challenge there is that then those two might have trouble working together. A very robust organization and a very resilient organization have trouble communicating and working together because they have very different ways of thinking and how they actually operate. So building a cross-functional team across those organizational boundaries would prove very challenging.
Now there are still a few questions coming in. I think we have some more time, so let's take them.
The example question?
Which example question?
Do you have any examples?
Yes. Do we have any examples of successful companies that transition to organic agility?
Yes, we do. If you actually go into our previous webinar history, the Kongstar customer case, from us, Andrea Tomasini did a webinar with the CFO of Kongstar going through their case, and they are applying these principles in practice. And that webinar includes them telling about that. So yes, there are some examples, and you can find that on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, for example. And we can send out the link to that webinar to the participants after this webinar by email.
Absolutely. One question still, how does organic agility align if a company doesn't have a product model in place?
Not entirely sure what is meant in this question, but I mean, it doesn't imply that you need to have a product in a sense. I mean, you can also be a service company and apply the principles and tools and things that we have around organic agility in a pure service company. It doesn't have to be a company that has, per se, a product itself.
Okay. Do you still have any questions? Now there are no open questions anymore. What I will do in the meantime is add a few links also in the chat that will be added also in the email to you afterwards. There's the link to all the webinars, upcoming and previous ones. You can have a look at them. There's a link to the Organic Agility website and also to the Agile 42 website. What I would like to mention is that we have also this coach clinic where you can book a slot with a coach. So I recommend that you take a look at that link as well if you would need some one-on-one sparring, or you have some questions that are unanswered or so on. Just feel free to book the slots. At this moment, they are also free. And then if you want to contact us regarding any matters, you can contact me or Lasse directly. We will send you our details in the email, or then there's the contact us webpage as well for offices around the world that can support you in these matters. And I don't think that there are at the moment any more questions coming in. So I think we should maybe start ending the webinar today. I'm really, really happy we had these many participants here. You were very active and had good questions. So that's always nice for us. The recordings will be sent out to you as soon as we have them. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out at any point. That's why we're here for you. Lasse already mentioned the upcoming webinars, so keep an eye up for them. We will also put in social media links and stuff, so you can follow easy also from there. From my side, I would just like to say thank you. Hope to see you soon again, and have a good working week.
And stay safe.
Yes, most importantly. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for participating. Bye-bye.